Ladies and gentlemen, this past weekend I had the unique opportunity of playing my first ever international FIDE rated tournament in none other than Japan, of all places. That's right, I played the 2024 edition of the Japan Open, which was held in Nagoya. And not only that, it was also my first ever tournament where I played FIDE rated players. I have technically played a FIDE rated tournament in the past, but because I didn't play against anybody with a FIDE rating, I don't have a rating myself. And so at the end of this tournament, I should be getting my first ever FIDE rating. Now, in these videos, I will be recapping the games I played in the Japan Open, starting with game number 1. So let's do that, and I hope y'all enjoy. In the very first round of the tournament, I played with the black pieces against a very young man named Antonio. And by very young man, I mean no more than 10 years old. A lot of children in the Japan Open. And Antonio has a rating of 1529. I am an unrated player going into this tournament because I have never gotten a FIDE rating in the past. And yeah, let's see how this game went. We started with e4, which I like to see. I like playing e4 myself with the white pieces, so I'm very familiar against e4. And so I play e5 here, and after knight f3, knight c6, and bishop c4 entering the Italian. Here I played bishop c5, which is the Gyoko piano game. If you keep up with my Road to 2000 Rapid Elo series, you know that this is my preferred response to the Italian. It leads to a very, very standard, balanced game, typically pretty symmetrical across both sides of the board. Here, Antonio decided to go c3, and I played knight f6. And after d4 is played, the move is takes. The move is takes, and if takes, which is one of the main lines, then bishop b4 check comes in. Here, the other main line is e5. This is very much also a move, and it is met with d5. Very important to play d5 here. If you don't play d5, as you can see from the evaluation lines, the engine lines that are right above me, if you don't find d5, you are just down by about a pawn's worth, according to the engine. So d5 must be played with the idea that if pawn takes knight, then pawn takes bishop on c4. And if en passant, you can just take back with either your bishop or your queen, probably your queen here, in order to maintain the defense of the pawn on d4. So after Antonio moves the bishop out of the way, I decide to go a knight e4 here. And c takes d4 happens. I play bishop b4 check. And after the bishop blocks, I decide to take with my knight. And Antonio plays the right move, developing with their knight and taking on d2. And here I decide to castle. So far, so good. White is slightly better here, but nothing too crazy. After castles as well, I decide to go bishop g4, become the aggressor in this position. The knight currently on f3 is pinned to the queen on d1. Now h3 can be played because after bishop takes, knight takes, or queen takes, both are fine. Actually, both are not fine. I should correct myself here. If bishop takes and queen takes, this is great for me because then I win a knight. So if bishop takes, knight takes is the move. Here I decide to make things a little bit messy, and it's a pretty big mistake on my end. I decide to take the pawn on d4. Now, here's my idea. If pawn takes, which is the right move, I was thinking that we could play knight takes here, right? So pawn takes, knight takes, and this seems to just win me a pawn. Now, what I missed, and I saw this after analyzing the game, is that my knight is trapped. If you look carefully, my knight has no squares right now. And so playing the move a4 at this moment would lead to just me losing a full piece. I have no way to save this knight. And I completely missed that. So made a mistake in my first game for sure. But my opponent also missed it, and my opponent played Queen B3, which seems like a good move. It seems like it skewers the bishop. I mean, skewers the knight through the bishop, and you can only save one piece. However, the one issue with this move, or at least multiple issues with this move, is it lets me just play something like c5 or a5, trying to protect my bishop. It also lets me play bishop takes on d2 in order to take a piece first and then protect my knight. I believe that's what I did. So bishop takes on d2 was on the board. After knight takes back, here I went knight d4. And actually, in order for my opponent to be more accurate here, they're supposed to go knight takes on b5. Because after knight takes on b5, let's say I try to get my bishop to relative safety, there's not very many squares that can do it. If you look carefully, this is not an option. This might be, but then I guess just g3. And then bishop h6 is met with g5. Actually, no, it's not met with g5. What am I talking about? Then bishop takes. Well, anyways, I can move my bishop to a few different squares. I guess I can move it here as well. But the best move is actually a6 in this position. a6, queen b3. You don't take the pawn on b7. You can take the pawn on b7, though. Interesting. Okay. Well, there's a lot to consider here. I'm not going to pretend that I am a super high-rated player, so hopefully I'm learning. If you all can see the reason why it is better to take the knight instead of the bishop in this position, please do let me know. Perhaps this just lets me improve my position by playing c6. Or actually knight d4 by making my knight stronger, and also by playing c5 on the next move. And here, oh yeah, well, there was a hidden idea here. So I guess the idea that my opponent wanted was that after knight takes here, if I try to move my knight away from the attack, then I hang a pawn. And what my opponent missed is that if you do take that pawn, you are losing the game. Knight e2 check is played. No matter where the king goes, queen h4 comes in, and that is checkmate. And yeah, that is how the game ended, actually. So, a relatively quick game. This one finished pretty fast. I definitely did not play it super duper well. I misjudged the one big decision I made, and I could have been punished for it. Game review says I played like a... Oh, Game review says I played 91.5% accuracy, but with one big blunder, to be fair. So you live and you learn, right? There's stuff to calculate. I feel like my main takeaway from this game is watching out for the getaway squares that my pieces have whenever I make moves. Because if I had done that, then I probably would have seen the fact that my knight was trapped in the line I went for. All right, with that being said, let's go take a look at game number 2. Okay, in game 2, I played with the white pieces against a Japanese player named Hibiki, who was a 17-13 FIDE rated player, so a much bigger step than game 1. And I decided to go e4, obviously, best by test. And Hibiki played c6, the Caro-Kann defense. And against the Caro-Kann, my preferred weapon of choice is the Panov. So it starts with d4, going for an exchange line, because after d5 I take, and after c takes d5 I go c4 here. And the exchange line, and specifically the Panov, is meant to clear up some of the space in the center of the board and get an early bishop out onto c4, if allowed. And yeah, this is actually a transposition of the Queen's Gambit accepted, interestingly enough. If you consider it, the Queen's Gambit is something like c4 here, and if takes, that is accepting the Queen's Gambit. So typically, the Panov is not always going to be accepted, or at least the sort of c4 pawn is not going to be taken immediately. Black will instead develop their pieces. Either knight c6 or knight f6 make a lot of sense in this position. And here, white is actually substantially, well, a little bit better. Plus 0.4 out of the opening is not that bad. After e6 is played by my opponent, I play knight f3. They go knight f6, castles, bishop e7, preparing castling as well, and knight c3, castle. So just going for a normal game of chess, developing our pieces, castling early on, keeping the king safe. Notice that I have this d4 pawn being an isolated queen's pawn. Now, when you have an isolated queen's pawn, your goal is often to try to push it as far as you can while maintaining a defense of it. Because what that does is it limits your opponent's space. Now, here, I actually am able to go d5. I'm curious if I did. I don't think I played it just yet. Here I decided to go a3 with the idea of disallowing some moves such as bishop b4. I do believe there was a other idea behind this, though. I think that my idea behind a3 was to play b4 and bishop b2. Now, one of the downsides of recording this game about a week after I played the tournament is that some of the games are not super fresh in my head, but a3 seems like a slowish move now that I look at it. The engine would have preferred something like activating my rooks, going rook e1, or going essentially activating my pieces that are not in the game yet. So bishop f4, queen e2, all moves that make intuitive sense. You want to bring your pieces into the game. But a3 is not bad by any means. After knight d7 is played, I decide to go b4. So this is indeed the idea. I do remember this now of going bishop b2. What I missed is that this move is really annoying. Queen c7. It kind of forces me to play the best move, queen d3 in the position, though, which is nice. I do find the best move. And here, after the knight adds pressure to the bishop on c4, I slide the bishop back onto b3. Maintaining pressure on the long diagonal. Well, this is not the longest diagonal, but it is a diagonal that goes towards the king. It's pretty closed right now, but if my opponent ever wants to play e5, there are definitely ideas here. And my bishop is pretty safe on b3, even though it is currently not defended by anything. Now, after a6 is played, I decide to go bishop b2, and look at my bishops. They enjoy a very healthy sort of X-ray against my opponent's castled kingside. Obviously, right now, they're not very strong just because they're pretty blocked in, but later in the game, they can hold quite a big impact. Rook d8 is played by my opponent, going after the isolated queen's pawn. I decide to go rook c1, opening discovery ideas against my opponent's queen. If this knight ever moves out of the way now, there is an attack on the queen, which is why my opponent played queen d6. Getting out of discovery ideas, also adding pressure to the pawn on d4. And here I activated my other rook, going rook fe1. Now, this is all very, very, very simple, slow, improving moves in the game. We have our first trade of pieces. The knights trade off, and after the knight takes back, I decide to go queen e4. Now my idea is bishop takes, with the possibilities of queen takes, rook takes being the only move that works for black. If bishop takes, pawn takes is actually a big mistake because the queen can take the bishop. Also, if bishop takes, pawn takes, this opens up an idea on the bishop. Obviously, in a classical game, my opponent is not going to miss this, and they are going to see that. But you're creating threats, and that is sort of the idea behind chess. b5 is played here, helping my opponents play bishop b7 and developing a bishop of their own in a strong position. I decide to go rook c5. I play a little ambitiously here. This is played to make this idea of bishop takes d5 work. Now, if you look carefully, let's say my opponent plays a waiting move, bishop takes d5 is incredibly strong, because after whatever takes back, if queen takes, rook takes, obviously. So if pawn takes, queen takes bishop. And yeah, that is my idea. Unfortunately for me, it's very easy to refute with a very natural move, bishop b7, which is what my opponent wanted to play anyways. And now I got to think again. Here I decide to go rook c1, and this is a mistake for me because of queen f4. Queen f4, if played here, would pretty much force a trade of queens. Not really force, but queen f4 here, and probably my best move is to... Oh, actually my best move is to take a knight. Okay, gotcha. Take a knight because that defends the queen, and then after queen takes, bishop takes, bishop takes. That's fairly complicated. Let's say hypothetically I take here, the knight takes back, and black is better in this position because first of all, they're attacking my rook, so I gotta do something about that. And second of all, this pawn is incredibly weak. So if I go like rook c2, for example, trying to defend my rook, they can just play something like bishop e4, bishop e4, bishop e4 here. Oh, that's nice. Bishop e4, forcing my rook to move out of the way. And they're just the ones creating all of the threats in the position. If you look at white, my own pieces in here are pretty blocked in. My dark squared bishop is doing absolutely nothing. My light squared bishop staring at a wall. And all of black's pieces can easily be activated. You can even try to trade rooks here. Actually, no, you wouldn't want to trade rooks, although it's good for black, I guess. Rook ac8 looks like it's good for black, actually. So, yeah, I misplayed here. However, my opponent didn't find queen f4. They played rook e8 instead, rook a e8 to be exact. I decided to trade rooks and go for a queen trade as well. Because without the rooks on the board, it's really hard to win my pawn on d4 because of the defense of my bishop, my dark squared bishop defending the pawn on d4, as well as my knight being able to jump in on defense, as well as my king soon coming into the game. So my opponent plays bishop b7. I trade the queens. That was my plan. And I decide to go knight d2. Knight d2 is played so that I can push my f-pawns, my f-pawn, and the rest of my kingside pawns. So here, after bishop f4, I have to move the knight again, but I make sure I move it to a different square so that I can actually play f3 this time around. My opponent plays a knight c7, attacking my knight on e4, opening an attack on my knight. And now I just play, I believe, knight c5, which attacks both the bishop and their pawn. However, the pawn's defended, so it doesn't really create a threat there. The bishop just slides to c6, and here, you know, we're entering an endgame where it should be a draw. It's pretty hard to make progress. We have a trade of pawns here, and soon enough, after a couple of moves, we have a trade of bishops as well. Trade of another set of pawns, and yeah, this is not anything too crazy. Ultimately, I think that I find a way to trade the bishops off as well. So my opponent goes after this pawn on d4, but I find a nice little move, bishop b2, which defends the pawn from a distance. However, it's not that great for me, because after bishop takes, also, for those who are curious, the bishop can't go here because of the knight. The bishop can go here, but I'm able to just play bishop a3 if I really want to force a trade. And obviously, this square is taken away. So the bishop's kind of stuck if it wants any future in the game. And the trade happens. Now, I am technically worse because of the pawn island I have on d4. So there's a concept in endgames in chess where typically if you have the same amount of material in a pawn endgame or a pawn in a piece endgame, the side with the advantage is the side with the least pawn islands. That means the side with the least groups of pawns that are disconnected. My opponent has 4 pawns that all can have contact with each other. Imagine this king moving out of the way, g6, f5. Essentially, because all these pawns are on files that are next to each other, these pawns can all work together to eventually have one pawn become a passed pawn and try to promote. While on my end, I only have 3 pawns to defend against this threat, and this pawn on d4 is kind of fighting on its own here. Now, if I'm able to keep this pawn on d4, my opponent can never play e5, or can, but you know, the pawn on d4 acts as a defender on the e file, which is why I'm not completely lost. But my pawn on d4 is certainly a weakness because it can't be defended by any other pawns. So my opponent plays king f5, activating their king. The king becomes a very strong piece in the endgame, for those who are not too familiar with endgame theory, endgame knowledge. I decide to play a knight b4. This restricts my opponent's knight moves. They can't play these moves anymore. And afterwards, g6 is played. What I realize is that this closes in the king completely. If you look at it carefully, my opponent cannot play here, 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 or here because of my pawn and my king respectively. So if hypothetically I were able to get a knight to jump on e3 right now, or maybe even g7 somehow with magic powers, that would be checkmate. So I decided to go for it. Let's play knight c2, see what happens. Obviously, it's a classical game. My opponent's not going to miss that. And my opponent goes a knight d5. Here, I'm very curious about knight e3 in the game, but knight e3 is bad because even though it forces a trade of knights, it also allows my opponent to play king g4, and after, so I can show y'all, this forces this. King f2 has to be played to defend the pawn, but now my opponent has king h3, and I run out of moves. This is called Zugzwang. I can play king f3 here, but all my opponent has to do is just play f5, something that's non-committal, and now king f2 happens, but king h2 is played. What's the point of king h2? After king f3 again, trying to protect the pawn, king h1 is played. And after king f2 here, king h2, king f3, king g1 is played. And if you look carefully, soon enough, my king can no longer defend this pawn on g3. This is called Zugzwang. This is when you have no other moves but a bad move. So I can play d5, it's a bad move. I can play g4, it's a bad move. I can play king e2, king e3, it's a bad move. So that's why I couldn't play that knight check, even though it traded off pieces and we had equal pawns in this endgame. And I observed that, so I played knight e1. However, knight e1 is slightly bad because it limits the squares for my knight. Instead, I should have probably played something like knight a3, because after knight e3, I can jump to knight c4, and then I have, access to good squares. There's an expression that a knight on the rim is dim, and that's very much true here. My knight's not really going to do too much. After knight b4 is played, there's a very big threat on the board. And well, actually, no, there's not a direct threat on the board. There is a threat if I play knight e2, which I play. I was locked in a mindset where the only moves I should be playing are knight moves. Because I thought if I ever play a king move, king g4 happens. It turns out that king e3 and king e2 are the best moves in this position, because if king g4 is played here by my opponent, now I can play king f2 without a problem, because after king h3, I have something like a knight g2. And I'm not in Zugzwang because of the fact that my knights are not traded off. I can just play knight moves while maintaining the defense of this pawn on g3. Now, instead, I played the only knight move I can play in this position. I can't go knight e2. I can't go knight d3 because my opponent's knight are defending these squares. So I decided to play knight g2. I thought, what's the harm? And the harm is knight c2. Why is knight c2 such a good move for black? If I play 91, I lose a knight. If I play 93, we trade a knight. And we've established the fact that this position is really bad for me if the knights are off the board. Now this means I have to do something besides that. And here if I play king f2, now king g4 becomes really strong, because what move do I play next? I still can't move my knight. That was the whole point, right? The fact that I could move my knight before. And now that I can't move my knight, I kind of have to play a bad move, like f5 or d5. This move, knight c2, was a very, very, very strong move, and my opponent deserves full credit for finding it. Here I saw no way out besides trading the knights and hoping I can hold on. And as we saw before, there is Zugzwang. The second the king goes to g1, I can no longer defend this pawn. These squares are not accessible. And so I decided to try to hold on this way. But I realized there is no holding on this way, and I resigned after this move was played. A really fun game of chess. Not too crazy on the tactical side. Pretty even most of the way through. Game review. Let's see the game review. Game review says that. Oh wow, I played with 91% accuracy again in this game. My opponent played with 96% accuracy, however. So clearly very, very well versed in the Italian. And yeah, apparently I played like a 2300 according to the game rating feature. But you know, that doesn't really mean anything. At the end of the day, it's about the win or the loss. I did not get the win. I did get a loss, and we ended day one with 1 win, 1 loss. That means 1 point out of 2. 1 point out of 2 for the tournament after day 1. I will post another video recapping my games on day 2, and then a third video recapping my games on day 3. I technically was supposed to have a 7th round on day 4, but spoiler alert, my opponent didn't show up due to an illness, so I only played 6 games during the tournament. And I hope you enjoyed watching what happened in the first 2 games. If you did, let me know. I would love to do more of these. The plan is to put out a second video in a day or two's time, recapping day 2. So, thanks for watching. Please do consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you enjoy my videos. It helps me out a lot. And I will see you all very soon with the next Road to 2000 ELO game. Take care. Goodbye.